Today I just kind of want to go through some of the system scope work that's going through upstream Keystone, kind of show off the feature a little bit, how it works, and then use that as an opportunity to kind of show operators and deployers how they can start enforcing system scope in their deployments and some of the things that they have to do in order to do that. All I have set up here is DevStack. I set this up last week. And then I installed a bunch of things that are in review and built them locally. So the first thing that I pulled down was the system scope feature that we have in upstream. It's currently going through review, which is the nice thing about doing this too, is that if there's something that you see that needs to work differently or something that we've missed, there's a good chance that we'll be able to catch that before that before it lands. So just let us know in review. But the first thing was the actual system scope feature in Keystone. After that, we added a bunch of scope type attributes to various Keystone resources. Next was teaching Keystone how to handle invalid scope exceptions from OSLO policy. The whole basis of this work is getting OSLO policy to enforce system scope and project scope differently. And when it recognizes that difference, it's going to be raising an invalid scope exception, which I'll show in a little bit. But when Keystone sees that, it should turn that around and emit like a 403, for example. And then after that, we have all of like the client bits. So teaching Keystone client how to give users and groups roles on the system, or generating system scope tokens, for example, patch to OpenStack client to kind of do that same thing, and Keystone auth. And there was also another patch to OSLO context to expose a couple of system specific attributes that OSLO policy needs when doing enforcement. But again, I'll show that in just a minute. So a little bit more information on our deployment. These are the users that I have. For this specific demo, we're just going to be using Alice, Bob, Jane, and Bill, which are just 4 people in my deployment that I can use to kind of show the system scope work. And then I just added a couple of different roles. We're going to use admin, but that comes out of the box. We have a writer role and a reader role. And the reason why I chose these was because they seem to be the most common use cases for people that have to customize policy to get it to be useful in their deployment. You often hear of somebody having to roll something up to get a reader role. So that's kind of why I chose this one. And in addition to that, I did have to make a couple of changes to Keystone's policy file. So we can take a quick look at that. And this is just generated with the sample policy generation scripts provided by OSLO policy. And this is all just rendered based on what we have in code. So this is the domain policies. You see the generated documentation, the policy name, and then the check string, which is the only thing that I changed. So how this reads is in order to get a domain, you either have to have the admin role, the writer role, or the reader role. But one additional important bit here is the intended scopes piece. This is essentially saying that domains are a system level resource, and in order to do anything to domains, you need to have a system scoped token or context on the system. So you need to have admin on the system, writer on the system, or reader on the system in order to get this information. So this is specified in code as an attribute of the OSLO policy objects. And then not only is it generated in documentation as you see here, but it's also available to OSLO policy when it goes to actually enforce scope. or enforce policies. So it's going to actually compare the context of the request being made and evaluate that compared to a policy's scope types. So for example, being able to do something system-wide with a project scope token would be a violation of that. And we turn all of that on by using a configuration option through also policy, which is called enforce scope. And the default for this is false. But when this is true, it takes those, the request and the context of the request, figures out if it's project scoped or system scoped, and then compares that to the scope types of the policy being enforced. If this is false, it will at least log a warning so that operators and deployers will know if they have users that are accessing things outside of their scope. So using a project scope token to roll out a new service in your deployment would result in a log warning, or it would result in a 403. So that's just a quick rundown of some of the config changes that I've had to make here. So let's get into granting some of our users various roles on this deployment. So we're going to give Alice the admin role system-wide. So she's essentially going to be one of our system administrators or our cloud admins. We're going to give Bob the writer role on the system. And we're going to give Bill the reader role on the system. And we're going to give Jane the admin role on just some project. So reviewing our work, we can see that we have a few system admins. Alice is one of them. Jane is admin on a project. Bob has the writer role, and Bill has the reader role. So let's start with Alice. We can see that she can grab system scope tokens, and you can see that from the system field of the actual token response. She can do system level things. Which is pretty straightforward. She can do a whole bunch of stuff in order to actually administer the deployment. So if we move on to Bob, and remember, he is a writer of the system, so he has the ability to view all of the stuff that Alice can view, but there's a few things that he can't do, which we've kind of left as, you know, system administrator specific operations, like creating new domains. results in a 403. He can't do that. He can't create services. But he can list services. He can list endpoints. He can list projects, users, all that kind of stuff. One of the other things in our policy was that Bob could update domains if he wanted to. He's a writer, so he can make updates, but he can't actually like remove them for whatever reason, or just the sake of this example. So then we can get into what Bill can do, who is our system reader. So he can list all the same stuff that Bob and Alice can, but he can't create, modify, make any changes to system level resources. So that kind of shows the read-only role from a system perspective. And last but not least, let's see how system scope affects Jane. Jane can get an admin token, or a token scoped to her project, which she has admin on. But Jane can't list domains, which is a good thing if we consider domains a system level resource. And even though endpoints are, exposed in your service catalog, Jane doesn't have the authorization to actually perform any APIs for endpoint management or service catalog management because they're system level things. So that just kind of goes through and shows how different scopes operate when you start taking system scope into consideration, and some of the things that you have to do to get OSTO policy to start enforcing that. We do have a lot of work left to do with some of the resources that can be considered system scoped and project scoped. A good example of that is the actual project resource. If you look at our role assignments here, we are operating as Jane, like we're authenticating as Jane, and we can see all of these projects, which probably shouldn't be the case. But we don't want to completely prevent Jane from seeing projects because she's technically a project administrator. So, maybe this response should be filtered based on her position within the tree. Like if there's projects underneath the project that she administers, she should be able to see those, but she shouldn't be able to see the service project, the admin, alt demo, beta. Like she should only see the ones that she should have administrator rights on. So there's still some work that we have to do there, but this is kind of setting us on that path in order to be able to enforce scope on different contexts from a systems context or a project context. And like I said, a lot of these patches are still in review, so if there's something that you've seen that you think needs to be a little bit different, or if you have some feedback on it, please don't hesitate to stop by OpenStack Keystone or leave a comment in reviews. Very curious to hear feedback. Any comments, questions, or concerns, please come find us. Thanks.